If there is one type of game that has dominated the gaming industry for decades now, outlasting nearly any other gaming trend, it's the zombie apocalypse subgenre. I say subgenre and not genre outright, because the zombie apocalypse concept can oftentimes fit fairly smoothly into a wide variety of games. Whether it be first-person shooters, third-person shooters, survival games, strategy, PvP, PvE, any given genre really. As far as genres go, you name it, and there's probably some zombie-themed game available for that demographic. Now, I have not played the original State of Decay game, and only have limited fleeting experience with the original version of State of Decay 2 via my short-lived Xbox Game Pass subscription trial. So for all intents and purposes, I'll be approaching State of Decay 2 Juggernaut Edition mainly from the perspective of a relative newcomer to this series. So to jump right into the meat of this video, what is State of Decay 2? State of Decay 2, like its predecessor, is a zombie-themed survival game. Notice that I'm not employing the all-too-often uttered phrase survival horror, because despite the fact that zombies appear more or less everywhere, and there are a surprising amount of survival mechanics, there's very little in the way of actual horror. This is not Resident Evil or Silent Hill. You won't have that looming sense of dread here, except perhaps the much more realistic sense of dread you feel at the prospect of going scavenging for supplies, yet again. Oh yes, if you enjoy backtracking and an endless supply of side objectives, good lord, you're going to have a wonderful time here. Speaking of imminent sensing of dread, I was quite dismayed to find that upon first launching the game, it bafflingly requires you to log in with your Microsoft or Xbox account in order to play. Given that Microsoft tried shoehorning in the ill-fated Games for Windows Live online service years ago, during their likewise embarrassing launch of the Windows Vista, you would think that Microsoft would have learned by now to rail back a bit on the always-online nature of their games. Turns out, no, this is not the case, at least in regards to State of Decay 2. There is no option currently at present allowing you to proceed to the main menu without first logging into Microsoft's online servers with your Microsoft account. If you don't have a Microsoft account already, you're effectively roadblocked from playing until you set one up. After this point, your next step is to select your preferred difficulty setting. You'll get to choose from Standard, Dread Zone, and Nightmare Zone. I don't know why they don't just refer to these difficulties as normal, hard, and expert, but apparently they wanted it to stand out as different, and in doing so made the process a lot more complicated than it needed to be. Despite this, the actual differences between the modes are fairly straightforward. At the two higher difficulty modes, zombies are far easier to alert, deal more damage, and tend to spawn in bigger groups. The survival elements likewise become more strenuous, with scavenging producing fewer results and requiring significantly more effort. For those seeking a true die-hard survival mode that will have them risking death day and night, both Dread Zone and Nightmare Zone will provide you some more of that much-needed challenge. For those interested in base building and story progression and an overall more relaxed experience, that's where Standard Mode comes in. I say more relaxed merely by comparison's sake only, because there is no true easy mode, much I am sure to the vivid disappointment of the average IGN game reviewer. After you select the difficulty, you'll get to pick out a starting pair of characters from a limited selection of rotation options, similar to the character selection screen from Sea of Thieves. Kind of appropriate considering that is also an Xbox/Microsoft title. I personally didn't mind as the game incorporated elements of a tutorial into the actual opening of the game, rather than portioning off the tutorial as a standalone preliminary experience, which is the right way to do it, but for those who absolutely despise tutorials of any kind, you're going to have to suck it up here, if you want to play. The tutorial introduces you to your initial band of survivors, which you can gradually expand on over time, and your initial base, which you'll find yourself spending your first hour or two in, before later abandoning for a larger and somewhat more customizable facility.
It sounds like we're empty again. We better be close.
This is a place. Pull up here. This should be safe, at least for a while.
It's rustic, but it has what I need to get started.
You can't ever let yourself get attached to any one particular survivor because they can die. State of Decay 2 does feature permadeath. When a character dies, they stay dead. They're not going to respawn at any point. You're going to have to accept that loss. Also, it's possible they may be turned into a zombie themselves upon dying. So you'll be forced to finish them off yourself, and then loot their body if you want to bring anything they were carrying back to base.
Barrel incoming! This'll slow me down.
In addition to constantly monitoring the physical health of your characters during and after combat, you also have to ensure your characters are getting their 8 hours of sleep, whether by day or by night. Otherwise, their stamina will be limited and they'll more or less increasingly begin losing the will to live. Kind of like Star Wars fans after seeing episodes 8 and 9. Likewise, ensuring your characters have ample supply of food and water is essential to keeping everyone happy, or at the least, keeping them from moaning like angsty teenagers on a CW show. Going back to the aforementioned difficulty settings, you can choose at any time to alternate between difficulties. Although personally I haven't chosen to pursue that option, it's nice to know the developers allow some flexibility for the player in that regard. In regards to difficulty, one area that will prove more difficult than most is the actual combat. This game is not World War Z nor Left 4 Dead. You will not have tsunami waves of zombies just rolling down the countryside at you. While this game can get into somewhat ridiculous territory, like how hitting a zombie with your car at just about any speed will cause it to explode instantly and subsequently splatter all over the place, the same as if you had just shoved a grenade down their throat. And yes, I did just make a grenade joke, so try not to clutch your pearls too hard, YouTube. You don't want them to break like the pearls on Martha Wayne's necklace. There, now I've evened out the grenade joke with a gun violence joke. What can I say? I'm an equal opportunity offender. If I'm going to offend once, I might as well do it twice. While there are rewards in place for taking the offensive approach now and then, such as your character potentially gaining increased reputation within your community for their bravery, frequent and sustained battles against the undead is not advisable at all. It is very easy to find yourself overwhelmed. There was one situation where on my way back from helping some nearby survivors, a game mechanic I'll touch on again later, I happened to be near the location of a plague heart and decided to go there and try to take it out. Plague hearts are one of the not-so-many side objectives you'll find yourself embarking on from time to time. In effect, it's not at all that dissimilar from the now all-too-cliché hold-your-ground type missions you saw all the time in older FPS games. Across the State of Decay 2 map, you have these oddly smoking, contaminated buildings that contain what looks like a giant beating diseased heart. These plague hearts produce mutated, blood-infected zombies that can affect and even kill your characters. If one of your characters gets bitten by a plague zombie, they'll slowly start to die. The only remedy for this is to develop a plague cure, which requires you to secure plague samples by killing a certain number of plague zombies. Plague zombies stand out from normal zombies in two visible ways. Their eyes, fittingly enough, glow blood red, as opposed to the dull yellow present in the eyes of most other zombies. Also, their bodies are largely skinless and covered in what looks like disgusting bloody boils. Not very pleasant creatures to look at, all in all. Now, I did what I could to enter the building quietly, except in the course of events, I and my AI companion inadvertently attracted the attention of a local swarm of zombies. I still attempted to accomplish the mission, and I did, but ultimately we found ourselves in a bit over our heads. Take a look.
I should reload. That was my last magazine. I guess I'm empty. Don't think I'm hurting it very much. I need help right away.
Another side objective you'll find yourself doing from time to time is climbing towers, in order to make observations about the world around you. Once again, State of Decay 2 seems more comfortable emulating and reworking existing game mechanics from other games, rather than creating its own from scratch. If you're a die-hard Ubisoft fan and idolize the minutes at a time spent excessively climbing towers, you're going to feel right at home with this game. Once you get to the top, you spend a minute or so aiming your sights around, scanning the area for markable locations in a manner similar to what was initially popularized by Shadow of War, the 2017 sequel to the Warner Bros. Interactive Entertainment published Lord of the Rings title, Shadow of Mordor. The open world is dominated by a sprawl of side activities represented as markers on the map. Although, as with many of your more basic open-world design formulas, many of these side quests are duplicates of one another. The actual variety of said activities is far more restrictive than the map at first glance would have you believe. One activity you will need to be engaging in with near religious fanaticism is saving nearby NPCs from being eaten alive, with them in exchange agreeing to join your newfound group. Either earlier or later in the video, I may have explicitly referenced how you can rush to the aid of certain NPCs in the world, and run the risk of becoming injured and or killed in heavy combat, with the possible reward of unlocking new NPCs to either trade with, or have them join you in your colony. Yet in hindsight, I don't think I really went into any detail about how that works. To use an example, in one of my instances I ran across a distress call, and after traveling a great distance, found a group of survivors holding their ground in a small house. This was probably one of the few instances where the combat actually felt intense. After so many instances of being attacked by a few stray zombies here or there, kicking zombies out of the house as easily as a cop gate crashing a teen party was oddly satisfying. Especially given that I had an unusually good weapon loadout in the form of a medium to long range crossbow and a blade whose type I forget the name of, but it resembled something not unlike a very large steak knife. I did recruit 2 of the survivors out of the 4, because the other 2 refused to tag along. I had the choice of either leaving all 4 of them alone, and they would just be relegated to the role of friendly traders, whom I could buy weapons and supplies from, or I could pick 2 individuals to be accepted into my base. I prefer a long-term investment rather than immediate access to tradable goods, so I chose my 2 new companions, which had the predictable but unfortunate side effect of angering the other 2 and dissolving the trading group. One bit of advice worth heeding is that the dialogue in this game can at times be incredibly misleading to the point where at times the outcome is the direct opposite of what was described. I had one instance where I could choose whether to accept an NPC into my group or not. I chose to do so as he had a desirable trait I wanted in my base, but then my character inexplicably blew them off for no reason and basically told them to fuck off. It was very bizarre, so keep an eye out for the dialogue choices because the game may trip you up at times for little to no reason. Now, getting back to the open world formula. What doesn't help is that, to the best of my knowledge and experience, as well as after some preliminary research online, the game doesn't seem to offer any form of a fast travel system, meaning you'll be spending the majority of your time either walking or, if you have enough gas, driving a car manually across the world. There isn't even an option in place allowing you to have the NPC take over the wheel and drive you instead. Some might make the argument that this is to the game's advantage, as in a survival game, realism should be thematically front and center, but in a game where simply bumping a zombie with the edge of your car causes them to instantly explode into hundreds of bloody pieces, there isn't a whole lot to support the notion that the developers were ever really aiming for a realism-minded approach. The world is beautiful if you've got a high-end PC to max out the graphical settings on. It may not be state-of-the-art gorgeous, but some of the environmental art will at times leave you feeling wowed. I was especially impressed with the quality of the water. Although at times I did notice that the game won't always register you as being in water from a sound effect perspective, at least not when you're in shallow streams and riverbeds. I'm not sure if this is a consistent technical oversight or just simply a bug in specific areas, but it's worth noting. Now, State of Decay 2 is playable in both single-player and online multiplayer, and even is one of the few games currently available on Steam that allows cross-play. The one upside to requiring a Microsoft sign-in the first time you launch the game is that you will have the capacity to play with your friends, even if they own the game on another platform like the Microsoft Store on Windows 10, or even on consoles like the Xbox One. Sadly, one of the key problems with Microsoft's heavy focus on multiplayer-centric gameplay, whether it be here in State of Decay 2 or in other similar Microsoft titles like Sea of Thieves, is that instead of trying to capitalize on long-form storytelling, satisfying and rewarding combat, interesting loot, and an open world that actually incentivizes endless exploration, Microsoft instead seems only interested in providing the core fundamentals necessary for any generic open-world game. This kind of reminds me of the situation with Bungie and Activision. For those who don't remember, Bungie and Activision collectively became infamous for their actions in regards to the entire Destiny franchise. After kicking off the franchise with a series of lies about game's future, claiming a 10-year-long roadmap, they then decided barely 2.5 years later to announce Destiny 2, and about 5 months after that, Destiny 2 was released. To make matters worse, it was revealed Activision had cut hours of in-game content from Destiny 1, promising to add it back into the game in the form of some future DLC. I heard more fans waited and waited, nothing happened. When Destiny 2 came out, instead of fulfilling the promises made by the developers that the missing content would then appear in Destiny 2, Destiny 2 instead scrapped most of, at the time, the beloved RPG mechanics and refused to incorporate any of the missing lore, and to add insult to injury, significantly cut back on the lore and story development in general. There seems to be this philosophical outlook by certain mainstream AAA publishers that you can't have both a compelling narrative experience and an enjoyable multiplayer component in the same game, without separating the two into separate modes. They seem to think that you cannot have them exist harmoniously. I don't know where that mindset comes from, since it is frankly quite a ridiculous and intellectually dishonest position to take. State of Decay 2 in its own right doesn't do all that much to challenge that position either. The narrative elements present in the game are weak to the point of being borderline non-existent, which is a huge disappointment and a missed opportunity. I've never been a big fan of The Walking Dead, but I do think The Walking Dead proves that you can do a lot with the whole post-zombie apocalypse setting, from a storytelling point of view. What makes The Walking Dead interesting is how instead of putting the narrative emphasis on a larger scale single story, it instead focuses more on developing its characters, placing their character progression ahead of any secondary larger scale world-related plot. I really like this form of storytelling because I think it works for a variety of reasons, and it's something I'll be bringing up in future reviews about storytelling in games. State of Decay 2 at times alludes to this concept by having the NPC companions in your base respond positively or negatively to your choice of mission. When you choose to undertake a side quest proposed by a aggressively minded NPC, other more passive NPCs will criticize you for being reckless. Conversely, if you do the opposite and only play defensively, the more outgoing NPCs will condemn you for your apparent inactivity and lack of leadership. But past this initial reaction, and perhaps a passing remark when you return, there doesn't seem to be much long-term memory of your activities. If I could indulge myself once again by referencing Shadow of Mordor, the feature I and most of the gaming audience liked best was its rivalry system, wherein enemy characters would retain specific memories of your interactions with them, to the point that they could refer to how specifically you last attacked them. Like how you burned their face after attempting to murder them with fire, or how they eliminated you with a sword or a spear. The game had literally hundreds, if not thousands, of scripted and fully voiced interactions of this kind, ready to account for any number of variables. How cool would it be if the NPCs here had similarly deep programming? Like maybe allowing NPCs in your base to befriend one another or form resentments towards others. So when an NPC dies during an expedition away from the base with you, their NPC friends would blame you for their death, while other NPCs that didn't get along with that individual would be either indifferent or possibly even express relief at the death. The programming here wouldn't need to be anywhere near as sophisticated as it was in Shadow of Mordor, but the concept of creating these artificial communal relationships would have gone a long way towards selling players on the concept that what they're living in is a very real post-apocalyptic society. While the whole rest of the world is falling apart, it only makes sense that those who remain would naturally create deeper bonds, whether positively or negatively, with their fellows, similarly to what you'd find in any real military platoon or a specialist strike force. One important mechanic you'll be relying on strongly in order to constantly fulfill the ever-increasing demands of your populace is by expanding your base with new improvements. Adding a garden will provide your base with a limited recurring source of food. Adding a gun range would allow your characters to practice their marksmanship, while other improvements provide passive bonuses as opposed to active ones, like the kitchen, which allows you to increase your food storage. There's a whole list of possible camp activities, many of which can be upgraded to increase their effectiveness. But were I to list the entire litany of possible base additions, along with their respective provided bonuses, this video would be several minutes longer than its already lengthy runtime. Every night, your base runs the risk of being attacked by a horde of zombies. While the potential destruction reaped by the zombies tends to be nominal at best, usually nothing more than the zombies shaking your metal gate door free from its latch and then deciding to casually walk in one or two at a time. Given that the game does include some limited destructible terrain, which can lend itself well to some really cool moments, it's a bit surprising that the base is seemingly indestructible as far as zombie-induced damage goes. I personally would have preferred it if the walls around the base did decay with damage and ultimately allow the zombies to break through. Given that the base wall runs entirely around the base itself, it would be extremely cool to be forced to adapt to this situation, as zombies break through in one or more specified areas at a time to really reinforce that idea of being surrounded by the undead. This could also play into the resource gathering. Imagine on top of gathering food, gas, and other supplies, also having to gather wood and nails in order to make repairs to the walls. This would be similar to the kind of base defense seen in games like The Forest, my personal favorite survival game. At the end of the day, State of Decay 2 Juggernaut Edition is a serviceable although unremarkable open-world action survival game that tries to implement a multitude of game mechanics and concepts, and as too often seems to be the case with most such games, fails to exceed at any one of them, and only comes across as adequate in all of them. Correspondingly, I neither love it nor hate it. It's enjoyable enough as a mid-tier game, set at the surprisingly reasonable price of only $29.99 USD, and the all-new content and the visual overhaul were surprisingly welcome additions to the existing core game. The developers could have very easily found success by just porting the game to Steam directly without making any noticeable improvement, but they took the extra step to actually warrant the otherwise rather audacious Juggernaut Edition label they attached to the game, taking the extra time and effort other studios their size probably wouldn't. While the end result is far from perfect, I recognize and applaud the effort the dev team made to put in the extra mile when gearing up for a Steam release. This is the kind of game you'd hear trumpeted about as being more fun with friends, and while that's true, it also strongly underlines one of the utmost criticisms of this game. It's just not really fun on its own merits. You'd need the presence of online multiplayer to substitute what the game by definition lacks on its own, and that's a pity. On that note, that's where I think I'm going to wrap it up for today. If you enjoyed this video, please do hit the like button and let me know what you think of State of Decay 2 as well as what you think of this video down in the comment section below. I do try to read and respond to all comments here on the channel, so you can always get my attention by commenting down there. If you like what I do and want to see more similar review content here on the channel, consider subscribing and clicking the notification bell to opt into getting notifications when my next review video goes live. Although I currently lack a consistent upload schedule, I do frequently put out review videos. I used to strictly adhere to a weekly format, but after listening to feedback, I made the executive decision to produce fewer but longer videos, as opposed to forcing out shorter videos just to keep myself on a weekly schedule. So currently it's more like an every other week schedule, but it's really more along the lines of whenever I feel a video is ready to go live. Before I go, I want to give a big thank you to those of you who made it to the end of this video, and an additional shout of thanks to those of you who have recently subscribed to the channel. I was blown away by the explosion of support following the release of my last video. I didn't expect to go from 475 subscribers to over 500 literally overnight. Reaching 500 subscribers is a really big personal milestone for me, so thank you for those of you that have helped me achieve it. Now, onwards to 1,000. Also, on a more serious note, for those that can, please stay inside and stay safe. With the number of positive cases for a certain unspecified sickness, whose name I can't mention without inducing the wrath of the YouTube algorithm, being on the rise, it's important that we all do our bit to limit the spread by reducing contact with others. In other words, no better time than now to connect with your friends and family online, rather than seeing them in person, putting them at risk. Also, great time to catch up on YouTube, so if you're here, thanks for the attention. At any rate, this is WarriorDan signing out. Stay awesome, everybody, and peace out.